you ever wondered what silence used to sound like before the world buzzed with wires and screens? Tonight, let me take you to the edge of a quiet forest in a time when letters were written with ink and hearts were heavy with untold dreams. In the year 1834, in a distant colonial province, there lived a young woman named Amara. She was the daughter of a clockmaker, but her soul ticked differently. While the town moved with discipline and duty, Amara moved with questions. Her house stood alone, wrapped in vines and wild roses, where the silence spoke more than words. Amara was unlike the other ladies of her time. She did not dream of jewels or ballrooms. She dreamed of maps, of old stories buried under stone, and of voices that history had forgotten. One rainy afternoon, while dusting the attic of her ancestral home, Amara found something that changed her life forever. A leather-bound diary, fragile at the edges, with ink faded by time. The first page read, "To the women they tried to silence." Amara's fingers trembled as she turned the pages, each word pulling her deeper into a world that no longer existed. The diary belonged to her great-grandmother, a woman no one ever spoke of, a rebel, a dreamer, a whisper in the storm. That night, Amara couldn't sleep. She lit a candle, sat by the window, and read the diary aloud to the wind. It spoke of secret meetings under the old oak tree, of letters smuggled in bread baskets, of lullabies that were really codes, and of women who fought, not with weapons, but with knowledge and love. And for the first time, Amara didn't feel alone. She felt like the flame in her heart had come from somewhere, a line of women, keepers of forgotten stories. And as you lie down tonight, let your breath match the rhythm of the rain. Imagine that attic, that candlelight, and a young woman uncovering her truth. The world may forget
wind howled
many things
outside that night,
but not the soul
but inside,
of a story
Amara
told
sat
in silence.
in perfect stillness. The note from her great-grandmother rested in her lap, its words lingering like incense in the air. You are the next voice in the silence. She read the line again and again. It didn't feel like a message. It felt like a calling. In the days that followed, Amara began reading the diary more carefully. Page after page, she uncovered stories of courage, fear, and quiet rebellion. There were names of women, ordinary on the outside, but brave in the ways the world never noticed. a baker's daughter who delivered coded messages in loaves of bread, a seamstress who stitched warnings into hems, a healer who whispered news during temple prayers. Each one had risked everything, not for glory, but for a future they would never see. And now Amara held that future in her hands. She realized something deeply unsettling. The world had tried to erase these stories. They were not in books, not in monuments, not even in the songs sung at festivals. Like the last flickers of candlelight before sleep, the village, quiet as always, continued with its rhythm. Cows tied at dawn, bakers rolling dough, children chasing shadows in muddy lanes. But within one house, something had changed. Amara had begun to write, not just stories from the diary, but her own thoughts, her own questions, her own answers. Each night, by candlelight, she would pen letters, not to anyone in particular, but to every woman who had ever been told to stay quiet. She wrote for the woman who watched stars from her window, for the girl who hid poems beneath her mattress, for the mother who forgot she once loved to sing. Her diary filled quickly, and one evening, she did something bold. She walked to the village square, where an old notice board stood, usually filled with wedding dates and harvest news. She pinned a copy of her letter there. Nothing grand, just a single page, titled, "For the Women Who Remember in Silence." The next morning, someone read it, then someone else. And within days, more letters appeared. Old pages, torn from old books, scraps of poetry, secret confessions. The board bloomed, not with roses, but with truth. Amara never signed her name. She didn't need to. She had sparked something that didn't belong to her alone. One afternoon, a little girl came to her gate holding a daisy. She smiled and said, "My mother said you're a storyteller. Can you tell me one?" Amara knelt down, brushed the child's hair back, and said softly, "Yes, little one, I know just the story." And she began to speak about a woman long ago who hid messages in embroidery, about trees that held secrets, about songs that were really stories, and about the fire inside every quiet girl waiting to rise. Tonight, as you lie in your bed, listen to the silence. Can you hear it? That hush between thoughts, that softness under the noise. That is where stories live. And maybe, just maybe, a woman named Amara is whispering to you, telling you that you, too, carry a story worth telling. Sleep now. The stars are watching. The past is at peace. And you are home. There are stories that end in silence. And then there are stories that begin from it. Months passed since the notice board had bloomed with unheard voices. The village had changed, not with noise, but with understanding. The women now walked a little taller. The girls asked more questions. The silence had softened. But one evening, as Amara sat by the window, she looked at the stars and felt something stir within her. It wasn't unrest. It wasn't sadness. It was a calling. A feeling that her story and her great-grandmother's story were not meant to live in just one place. That night, she wrote a letter, not to a person, but to the world. I carry with me not just ink and paper, but the whispers of women whose names you never knew. I am walking now toward places that forgot their own echoes. And so, Amara packed a small trunk, the old diary, her red notebook, some dried rose petals, and the little carved box Maji had given her. At dawn, she tied her braid, wore her great-grandmother's scarf, and stepped out of her home into the unknown. No one stopped her. No one asked why. They simply nodded as if they already understood. Her first journey was to a nearby town. Dusty roads, stone buildings, a school with peeling walls. There she offered to read stories, not from textbooks, but from lives. Children sat around her wide-eyed as she spoke of silent rebellions, of women who wrote in shadows, and of bravery sewn into the fabric of old saris. One teacher whispered after class, "My grandmother was like that too, but I thought it was just an old tale." Amara smiled. "Maybe it was, but now it's yours to carry forward." And so, town after town, she wandered, not to preach, but to awaken. Sometimes she read. Sometimes she simply listened. But wherever she went, fires were lit, not of flame, but of remembrance.
Now, as you prepare to rest, close your eyes gently and imagine a woman in a red shawl walking under starlight. She carries no map, only voices. She seeks no fame, only forgotten names. And maybe, just maybe, when you sleep tonight, you'll hear her footsteps, soft, distant, but familiar. A story doesn't end when the pages close. It ends when it's forgotten. And this one is still being told. Good night, traveler, and may you dream in echoes. The train moved slowly, like it had stories of its own. Amara sat by the window, watching fields blur into memories. This was her first long journey, far from the hills, far from her village. But within her, the silence had grown louder, richer. She clutched a letter from a distant women's school. They had heard of her readings and wanted her to visit, to speak not from books, but from bloodlines. The school was old, built by women who had been forgotten even by their own grandchildren. Inside, young girls whispered in corners, some too shy to raise their voice, some too tired to dream. Amara didn't bring rules. She brought a story. And one by one, the girls began to write. Not essays, not reports, but letters to themselves. Dear me, you are not broken. You are just a page no one has read yet. They called themselves the Silent Sisters, and for the first time, they sang a lullaby to themselves, not to sleep, but to awaken.
Wind rustling cloth. The train moved slowly, like it had stories of its own. Amara sat by the window, watching fields blur into memories. This was her first long journey, far from the hills, far from her village. But within her, the silence had grown louder, richer. She clutched a letter from a distant women's school. They had heard of her readings and wanted her to visit, to speak not from books, but from bloodlines. The school was old, built by women who had been forgotten even by their own grandchildren. Inside, young girls whispered in corners, some too shy to raise their voice, some too tired to dream. Amara didn't bring rules, she brought a story. And one by one, the girls began to write. Not essays, not reports, but letters to themselves. Dear me, you are not broken. You are just a page no one has read yet. They called themselves the Silent Sisters. And for the first time, they sang a lullaby to themselves, not to sleep, but to awaken. One night, Amara sat by a well in a desert town. She had no schedule, no plan, just stillness. An old woman joined her, wrinkled, sun-kissed, wrapped in a sky-blue dupatta. You carry fire in your voice, but do you ever let the moon speak back to you? Amara stayed silent. The woman handed her a little clay pot. Inside was a folded parchment stained with saffron. It read, "We never owned land, but we owned songs. We never wrote history, but we planted memory under stars." That night, Amara didn't speak. She listened to the moon, to the sand, to the stories that didn't want ink, only presence. In a seaside village, Amara heard of a strange place, a library with no books, only people. Each morning, one elder would sit on a mat. Listeners would come, and for 1 hour, that elder would tell a story from their life. It was called Zinda Kitabgar, the living library. Amara sat before an old fisherman's wife. She spoke of waves, of loss, and of love letters sent in fish nets during war. Amara asked, "What do you want remembered?" The woman smiled. "Not my name, just that I was here, that I loved, that I listened."
And so Amara wrote nothing that day, only sat, only remembered. Wind rustling cloth. In one village, Amara arrived to silence. No one welcomed her. No one smiled. The women here had forgotten how to speak for themselves. Their eyes were tired, their hands forever working, their laughter lost in smoke. Amara waited for 3 days. Then she sat under a banyan tree and began humming the lullaby from her great-grandmother's diary. On day 4, a little girl approached. "What are you singing?" she asked. "Just an old story," Amara said. The girl came back the next day, and the next, and then more children. Soon mothers came, then grandmothers, not to talk, just to listen. And then, one night, a woman finally whispered, "I remember now. My mother used to sing that." The fire hadn't died. It had just been waiting. The return home. Wind rustling cloth. After a year of wandering, Amara stood once more at the gates of her childhood home. The vines had grown thicker. The wild roses still bloomed. Inside, dust had settled on the table where she had first read the diary. But her soul was lighter now. She placed all her red notebooks on a single shelf, next to her great-grandmother's diary. Above it, she penned a note. "To the next woman who feels alone. We were here, and we still are." That night, Amara lit the fireplace, sat in silence, closed her eyes, and smiled. Because some journeys never truly end. Faint wind chimes. Now sleep, dear listener. Let your heartbeat carry the stories of women you've never met. Let your dreams be gardens where forgotten names bloom again. You are not alone. You never were.